I'm from Australia. I have a ministry called Tree Change Ministries, where I'm helping people move from city to country living. And that's taken a few different steps along the way, but I'll basically show my journey in that respect. My title is Being Prepared and Building Up Stronger, because God is a God of forewarning. He never does anything without warning us, and he wants us to be prepared. And that's what I'm trying to show in my testimony today. And I'll try and keep it a bit quicker as well. So here we have a quote, "We have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." This relates to what Sister just said as well. And this should be our ultimate aim, is to eventually be with God and reach heaven. On the earth, though, God wants us to be prepared. So here we see a quote from Proverbs, "The sluggard does not plough in the autumn, he will seek at harvest and have nothing." So God warns us that preparation is a key in our life's journey. Preparation is not about ignoring faith or take anything away from faith, but it puts faith into works and action. And that's what we're asked to do. So we need to apply our faith to help in the construction of plans and ideas, and ultimately God will lead the way in those. We should look at cost. It's something that may be a factor, like the sister mentioned, due to previous reasons. It may be something for other reasons, but we should look at how we plan out financially as well in our journey from moving from city to country. In some places that's a lot easier, in other places it's much harder. Prioritize. We need to prepare for the work that we're to do. So it says, prepare your work outside, get everything ready for yourself in the field, and after that build the house. And this may seem odd to some people, because they think, oh, well, shouldn't we build our house first so we've got somewhere to live type thing. But what God's showing here is that certain things take time versus others. To get a garden established and growing will take much more time, essentially, than to build the house. So this was the plan, and to prioritize what is important in that timing as well. So having planted fruit trees, for example, they'll take a number of years before they'll get fruit. And once they're planted, they can continue to grow while you're building the house or changing things elsewhere. External advice. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. One of the big issues with people moving to the country is they don't often have the knowledge or the experience. And this is something, that they may see it on TV, that it's being done in some show or documentary, and they want to move to that lifestyle, but they're moving from somewhere in a big city where they've never experienced gardening, they've never experienced nature, that they're not familiar with animals or snakes, as was mentioned, things like that. So one of the things God says is seek counsel from other people as well. They're the ones who have gone through these things. They've made mistakes. They've adjusted and been able to improve on things. So they'll have good advice for that as well. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do in my journey, is to offer advice to those who are also making that journey. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." So even though we may put plans together, it's God's purpose that ultimately is what we want to achieve there. And of course, spiritual building is also important, not just in terms of having a country lifestyle for the physical benefits, but for spiritual benefits as well. So It says here, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. A wise master builder. So this is ultimately what we should be aiming for in terms of our spiritual journey. So it says, according to the grace of God that was given to me as a wise master builder, I laid a foundation and another man is building on it. But let each man take heed how he is building on it. And in my journey, I've come from a place where that foundation has been laid well and has built up on top of that. And I'm helping others to build their own foundation as well and to improve so that they can learn as they journey on. And in our journey, we're to exhort and encourage others. So therefore, encourage each other and build each other up just as you are doing. This is an important thing because often when people move out to country living, they can leave family behind, leave friends behind, and they get a feeling of isolation or just total unaware of how different it can feel. And to have that encouragement is important. So that's the spiritual aspect of where I'm coming from. I'm going to have a look at my testimony, and I'll start by giving you a little bit of info about Australia because some people, although they're familiar with it, may not be aware of some of the conditions or size or population and so on. So I've just got a couple of quick slides to go through there. Here's a map of the USA, and one of the biggest comparisons I've found in looking at country living properties is that there seems to be quite a few properties available in the US that are much cheaper in terms of comparison to Australia. And you'll see here, you have that central line of states in the darker green. That's supposedly not only the cheaper land area, but also the most cost effective for living as well, to a large extent. So having different places in the US, you may find that there's some properties there that are advertised for under 100,000 that would be quite large, have established buildings and gardens and so on. But for Australia to have something equivalent would potentially be in hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, depending on where the location is. So it's a bit tricky in comparison for the style of country. Obviously, with the US, you'll have different value land depending on where you are there too, as the colouring shows. But Australia, you'll see in a minute why it's a bit trickier. So for those that don't understand the size of Australia, this is an overlay onto USA just to give people an idea. And Australia has a population of roughly 25.5 million people. Now, what most people consider then, particularly when they see the size like this, they say, wow, what a great place for country living. So much land there available for people to utilise. But there's a few other things that they need to consider. So here's an example of what would be considered more our livable areas. So most of the green area is where the majority of people will live. The yellow area is considered remote, and the majority of that is actually desert to some extent. So you can see that 25.5 million people essentially live around the boundaries on the east coast and the south coast. And that's why it's very expensive. So on the edge of that green area, we have what's called the Great Dividing Range, which runs from the bottom of, in the Victoria state up through to the top. And once you go over that, then you sort of start getting into remote areas, and it's much harder to get country living type properties. Just a quick overview for those who may not know some of the Australian animals that are more familiar. Australia is well known for its animals. Some of them, particularly when you go out the country, can be a bit more of a problem than being cute and cuddly. But it's interesting, the diversity that we have here. The platypus that you see down the bottom there is an interesting one for evolutionists, because it's one of only 3 monotreme animals in the world. So it has a duck bill, it has a body like a beaver-like body and tail, feet like an otter, it has a pouch like a kangaroo, it lays eggs like a bird, but it suckles its young, yet it doesn't have a teat, it does it through excretion, through the skin in the pouch. So this confused evolutionists for a long time, which, well, it does. And it also has a venomous spur on its back foot. So it's one of the more interesting ones in Australia. The other thing that Australia is probably well known for is being one of the deadliest places in Australia, in the world. So we have quite a large number of animals, for whatever reason, turns out to be venomous or dangerous in many ways, including things from shells on the beach, octopus, lots of spiders, snakes. We have, I think it's 7 out of the top 10 deadliest snakes in the world, and even right down to the jellyfish you see at the bottom in the little tube. That's the irukandji jellyfish, which is one of the deadliest in the world as well. So there's lots of interesting things to discover in Australia, the majority of which, however, most of the time you won't have any issue with, as long as you manage it properly. So the question then becomes city life versus country life. I'm a bit different to most testimonials because I'm actually raised in a country living lifestyle. My parents became Adventist just before I was born, and only a few years after we moved into a country property on a dairy farm. And there I was able to get a lot of country living type experiences and knowledge from the places that we lived. Our property was essentially around an hour away from the nearest town, which had school and food and stuff. So there was a lot of stuff that we had to learn living in the country and being more self-sufficient. Once I finished school, however, my passion was in computers, and that wasn't available in the country at the time. So I moved into one of the bigger regional cities in Australia and started my career there in computers. I had my own business with a mission as well, but ultimately I decided that that's not where God wanted me to be. And I moved into remote work with computers and was able to purchase my own country property. Having a look at the country property, there's the quintessential kangaroo, or wallaby in this case. There are quite a few on my property. There's a view of the main building structures and yards there. There's much more behind that in terms of hills and wooded areas, springs, and driveway that leads down to that area. And there's the house. You'll notice here it looks a bit dry there, but it's actually the end of winter. Winter is very cold at my property there. It's around 700 meters elevation. It's just below the snow line, but it can get down to about -10 there without having snow. So it kills off a lot of the grass and stuff over winter, and then it grows back in springtime. And you can see some of the grass just starting to come back around the house here during the spring. The largest boundary on my property is roughly a mile, and it's the Sells River. And so that gives me access to constant water. It also feeds off the water catchment area for 3 valleys on the east coast of Australia. So water is assured in that situation. Another thing to consider was what do you do when you've got a country living property? How do we keep going with business or have an income? And some people go different ways here. I was lucky enough that I had the remote technical work and could work from anywhere. I had to use satellite in my situation because there was not even mobile or cell reception there. So I had to use satellite and still do to this day. But if you're lucky enough, you can do the remote work, as a few people have mentioned, but otherwise planning ahead and working out what source of income you're going to have there, it is quite useful. And I would also recommend that you consider the option of a career change, because there's obviously some things that aren't going to work in country living as a career. So trying to keep that and force it into the situation's probably not going to work. So I lived on my country property for a while and was managing that. But after a few years, I met up with my wife, who was in the country, in the city, sorry. And I actually got married to my wife then and moved back to the city because that's where all her stuff was and her family. So I've been helping transition with that, and it's been going well, but there's more to do. But the mission that I now have that's working quite well is to help people who are still in the city move to the country. And there's people who have sold houses and looking to buy properties. I help them in finding properties and what things to look out for in a good property, what they need, any dangers involved, what sort of energy they'll have, and garden, the soil quality and all that sort of stuff. So this has given me another mission that helps in that work as well. And to give you an idea of some of the areas, this one, I teach foraging skills to a lot of people. So having grown up in the country, I learnt to forage, what's called wildcrafting, I believe, in America, or bush foods here in Australia. So learning to find your foods in nature around you is a very important skill to have and a very useful skill. Here's some other native Australian fruits and plants as well. So you can see this is just a very small variety of what's available out there. Another one is medicinal plants. What many people refer to as weeds can be used in many good ways. This we use as part of medical missionary work as well, in helping others overcome simple illnesses or if they have conditions such as itches or headaches and that sort of stuff. This is the one of the big areas that people are most shocked about when moving from the city if they're not prepared. Sanitation. They're used to nice flushing toilets and bidets and toilet paper and things like that. In country living, that can often not be the case, particularly if you're just starting out. The good news is that in the last 20 years or so, there's been a lot more technologies that help with that. So there's plenty of systems that are even based on flushing water. But some of these here you'll see, this is the more traditional long drop toilet, and you've got others with composting toilets like this, and even more advanced biogas type setups where you can recycle the human waste and other products to create burnable gas and mulch for your garden, to make you even more self-sustainable. Gardening, this is very much in the style of the garden that I grew up with in the country. The main reason was, as I said, you're an hour away drive to the nearest supermarket, so you basically grew as much of your own food as you possibly could. Some people will take this to another level where they'll make it even bigger and turn it into a market garden, or they may create products out of the excess vegetables that they have to sell as a business income. All of that's quite viable for country living properties. The important thing is to basically know what the soil type is and what sort of things you can grow there. Australia has quite a vast range of temperate zones. So you have everything from the tropics right up the top down to your cold mountain type regions further south, and then anything in between. So you've got to be a bit more careful in what you choose and how you grow it. In terms of helping people prepare from moving to the city to the country, it's very hard to have a garden the size that you saw there in the city. So ways of getting people prepared are doing alternatives, things like vertical gardening. This is very useful if you're in a place like units or something where you've got limited space. Even if you're in a high rise and you may only have a short balcony space, this is where you can start being involved in gardening as well and learning some of the skills that it takes. So this one is for more of a home, potentially, but you have the veggie beds there and what's called container gardening, which we also help people with, basically growing food in whatever containers they have, whether it be flower pots or barrels or shoes or whatever's made available. Another big thing for country living is the preserving of food. We do a lot of this helping people with canning methods, drying methods. There's also others like pickling, fermenting, salting, and so on. All these are a good skill to have for country living, because most places you don't have a full year of the one food. You'll have a seasonal period for different foods, and some of those will come in big gluts. So you may have all your apple trees all of a sudden be ready to harvest, or you may have a particular vegetable ready to harvest, and that will be it. And being able to preserve those is a skill that's worth learning. And this is something that you can learn in the city before you transition to country living. Even if you just buy the produce from the supermarket, you're still able to learn the skills and be aware. Some other skills that we help people with, passive heating and cooling of a house, how to essentially save energy in your heating and cooling costs. That's very important in Australia because of the different temperatures. We have generally temperatures ranging from about -10 through to about 45. You can exceed those a bit, like if you go further towards the desert, you'll get above 50. If you go down into the cold snow areas, you might get down to the -20 area. That's for Celsius. What would that be in the other one? Probably around 15 Fahrenheit through to about 115 Fahrenheit, I think would be the average temperatures. Here's some energy that we help people with, give an overview of some of the areas, because when you're in the country here, you don't have connection to facilities like the sewerage pipes, you don't have water pipes, you don't have gas pipes. All of that has to be provided in other ways. Here's the three main ones that we use. You have the solar panels for solar energy, hydroelectric if you've got suitable water, and wind turbine can be used in some places as well if you've got appropriate wind. And quite often you use a combination of those to help keep the consistent supply of energy and batteries charged in that way. And one of the final things that we look at, very important in country living, is reduce your waste. A lot of people are used to the convenience of city life. They'll throw something out rather than repair it. They'll throw food scraps into the bin to go into the trash can type thing, whereas they could be used for compost, or they could be used to feed chickens, or even in a biogas generator create gas for cooking and so on. So there's lots of different things to learn in that regard, and how people can reduce what they're required to use from day to day. It's also important in our journey too, because Mrs. White gave the vision in early writings where she talked about people journeying, and the further they journeyed towards their destination, they had to stop with the horse and cart and just go by horseback, and then they had to take their provisions off, and then they eventually got to the stage where they were walking and they had to take their shoes off. So it's an indication that we essentially ultimately need to get rid of all our dependence upon worldly things. And this is one of the best ways to start with, is just by reducing everything that you don't need, and stop gaining things that are irrelevant to what we need and use.